This week on Africa Update, France recalls envoy to Burkina Faso as popularity of the former colonialist continued to diminish on the African continent. What is responsible for anti-France sentiments in Africa? Also on the program, what could make a 51-year-old turn her 4-bedroom home into a refuge for 600 cats? Find out why. Plus, our Roundup Africa with Chiamaka Onwafo. This is Africa Update, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ila. Thanks for joining. France has announced that it will recall its ambassador from Burkina Faso a day after agreeing to demands from the ruling junta to pull out troops from the former French colony in Africa's Sahel region. Burkina Faso had asked France to withdraw within a month its contingent of some 400 troops currently stationed in the country, and on Wednesday, Paris agreed to do so. Take a look.
Burkina Faso has decided to end a military accord that allowed French troops to fight militants on its territory, the government said on Monday. The West African country is facing an insurgency by groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Large swathes of land have been taken over and millions displaced in the wider Sahel region. On Saturday, Burkinabe National Television reported that the government had suspended a 2018 military accord with Paris on January 18th. Giving France 1 month to withdraw its troops. The next day, French President Emmanuel Macron said he was awaiting clarifications from Transitional President Ibrahim Traoré. But on Monday, government spokesman Rimtalba Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo said, "We don't see how to be more clear than this." The vision of the Burkinabe transitional government, according to Ouedraogo, is for the country to defend itself. He added that it was not the end of diplomatic relations with France and that Burkina Faso still wanted support in the form of military equipment. French authorities did not immediately respond to requests for comment, but French influence in its former colonies has been declining. That could be seen in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, on Friday. Hundreds gathered calling on the French army to get out and burning French flags. Both Burkina Faso and neighbouring Mali are ruled by military juntas that seized power in the past 2 years and have burned bridges with traditional allies. Last year, French troops pulled out of Mali after a deterioration in relations. That departure coincided with the Malian junta's decision to hire Russian mercenaries to help it fight insurgents. Macron has accused Russia of predatory influence in troubled African countries. Burkina Faso has not confirmed or denied recent reports that it has also decided to hire Russia's Wagner Group.
Now, examples of deeply rooted anti-French sentiment abound in West Africa, from the October 2022 attacks on the French embassy in Ouagadougou and the French Institute in Bobo Dioulasso to regular demonstrations in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger protesting France's presence in the region, or from the ransacking of French-owned businesses in Dakar in March 2021 to the countless invectives spouted at French politicians. There is a great deal of hostility being felt by most of the general public, which rejects all forms of French presence, whether diplomatic, economic, and above all, military. So what is responsible for this sentiment? To better understand this, we have joining us a former Nigerian diplomat and spokesman, Ogbole Amedu Ode. He is the former spokesman of the Nigeria Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you for having me on your program.
All right. Now, could this be an orchestration to shut down any opposition to possible authoritarian tendencies of the military junta in Burkina Faso or in Mali, as we have seen?
To put this issue in a proper perspective, I want us to go back a little bit into our post-colonial history and the happenings there. It was Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, independent Ghana, who coined the phrase neocolonialism, and he defined it so very succinctly to be power without responsibility. And power without responsibility on the part of all of the colonial authorities, including Britain and more so France, is what we can use to define their presence on the African continent even after our political independence. You will recall also that the French set out an agreement to all aspiring Francophone countries to sign an agreement to remain part of France overseas, and to further put it in a cul-de-sac situation, it enunciated a policy of assimilation, a cultural approach to having all Africans in Francophone countries believe and begin to want to aspire to be black Frenchmen, changing their names, changing their attitudes and all. So this and the economic domination has always been enunciated a latent opposition, which has always been there, but remained latent until recently.
All right, now another question that a lot of people will be asking is, with the severing of ties between Burkina Faso and France, can the country be able to deal with the rise of terrorism in that country without the support of France?
Well, could I also ask whether the French were indeed helping the authorities there to fight terrorism, or playing a double game? Perhaps they were supporting Burkina Faso, Mali, and others to fight terrorism. Perhaps also they were aiding and abetting terrorism clandestinely. You and I can never know, except the intelligence community.
All right, now what does Burkina Faso seek to lose in this instance with the severing of these ties, if there is any? First
will be the cordial relations with France, quote and unquote. The cordiality that is quote and unquote, it will lose that. But if you ask me, and you have done so, and I would like to put it in proper perspective, I want to argue that whatever is happening and all the goings-ons are situated or can be situated within the world order that is being gradually adjusted, shifting supremacy from the west to the east. The last century, to my mind, was the Western century, first by the British Empire, and then eventually by the American Empire, quote and unquote. This century is the Asian century, and that century, or Asia, is being led by China, with, of course, other Eastern powers, Eastern global powers like Russia in the tow. So what we are seeing on the board running out now is a fight for spheres of influence by all powers. The losing powers are fighting to remain. The newcomers are also fighting to gain dominance.
All right, now France is not the only former colonialist to Africa, but yet it appears to be as though France is the only country or former colonial power that is being rejected in such a manner as we have seen in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, even in Senegal and the rest of them. So what do you make of this?
My answer to that is twofold. Number one, especially in our sub-region, West Africa, France is has the largest territory of post-colonial experience and dominance. Of the 16 West African countries, I think that only 4 are Anglophone and 1 Lusophone. The rest are Francophone countries. 2, I will want to situate the response to the nature, or if you look at the organic nature of colonial authorities and all that. The French have the most acidic, if I may use that adjective, the most acidic colonialism. I did a stint in Cameroon as a diplomat between 1990 and 1992. I discovered that they were training Cameroonians as nurses, but they refer to them as médecins africains, that is, African doctors. You see, to their mind, a nurse of African extraction is good as a doctor. But if you look at the British form of colonialism, let's look at it from the education perspective. Way back in 1957, the British authorities had already built, before our independence, they had already built a University of Ibadan. Way in Kampala, in East Africa, they had built Makerere University. So the French version of their colonialism is fairly much more brutal than the British form of colonialism.
All right. Now, are there international political dimension to this issue? There are some speculations that, well, this has to do with, Russia and China. You've earlier touched on it. I would like for you to speak more to this issue. What are the international political dimensions?
Of course, it is a question of the world order is shifting. It's been readjusted with the ascendancy of world powers of Asian extraction, if I may use that adjective, and all that, led by the Chinese, and also, of course, the Russians have been there, and the other global economic powers that have been there. Japan, for so long, was the second largest economy in the world, but without any military direction to it because of its role in as an Axis power in the Second World War, which they lost, and resoundingly so. The other ones are there, Singapore, South Korea, and all. So the World Economic Hub is shifting to the East. And like I said, while the sun is rising and rapidly in the East, that does not mean that the sun has set in the West. So what we see that Western powers are struggling as hard as they can to make sure that they don't lose out. If you ask me, I believe that the global dining table and those who sit on it have grudgingly accepted China to the dining table. But even then, there will still be differences of what to take and what not to take. And the playground, of course, is our dear continent, Africa.
All right, now this tilt that we see, to what extent do you think it will bring stability to the continent? So if this alliance with the West hasn't resulted in much as expected, then this direction, are you optimistic about what is likely going to bring?
You call it alliance, I'll call it domination. Domination of the West, has it brought us anything? Not much, if there's anything. Domination or alliance with the East depends on how we play our card. But so far, I do not see Africa and African countries playing their cards the right way. Sadly, so.
What will it take, really, to play those cards right?
Well, set out your agenda. Africa at the continental level, at the African Union level, has Agenda 2063, what and the roadmap, what we should cover in terms of Human Development Index. Are we following them? Do we insist? Do we have the focus? Do we have the resources? Sadly so, for example, the headquarters of African Union in Addis Ababa was built and donated by the Chinese for free at $200 million. Recently also, after the ECOWAS summit here in Abuja, I saw in the news that the Chinese are building a headquarters for ECOWAS that will house both the ECOWAS Parliament, ECOWAS Court of Justice, and the ECOWAS Commission, again for free. But I can tell you something, there's nothing like a free lunch in international relations.
Well, thank you so much for your perspectives, former Nigerian diplomat and spokesman, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria, Ogbole Amedu Ode. We appreciate your thoughts here.
Thank you very much and Happy New Year.
All right, thank you. You're watching Africa Update on Trust Television. Coming up after the break, what could make a 51-year-old turn her 4-bedroom home into a refuge for 600 cats? Find out why after the break.
TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back from that break. You're watching Africa Update, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Now, about 20 African heads of states and private sector leaders met in Dakar, Senegal, for a high-level discussion on roadmaps for achieving food sovereignty in the continent. The meeting, under the auspices of the second edition of the Feed Africa Summit, lays out action-driven discourse on how heads of state will mobilize government resources and leverage development partners and private sector financing to harness Africa's food and agricultural potential and turn advocacy efforts into concrete actions. With the theme, Feeding Africa, Food Security and Resilience, the summit is organized by the Africa Development Bank Group. Take a look.
It is time for Africa's sovereignty and resilience. While gains have been made in recent times with agricultural growth in several countries, the continent remains over-dependent on food imports. Africa currently imports over 100 million metric tons of food, valued at $75 billion annually. Today, over 283 million Africans go to bed hungry every day. This is not acceptable. No mother should ever have to struggle with the rumbling of the stomach of a hungry child. Africa can, and Africa must feed itself. With 65% of the uncultivated arable land left in the world being in Africa. What Africa does with agriculture will determine the future of food in the world. Your Excellencies and their elders of Africa, please help Africa to feed itself. Africa may not be able to manufacture airplanes yet, but there is no reason why Africa cannot fill airplanes with food and trade with the rest of the world. It is in the interest of the rest of the world that Africa fully unlocks its agricultural potential.
Now, Rachel Kabwe is known in the outskirts of Kenya's capital, Nairobi, as the Cat Woman because the 51-year-old has turned her 4-bedroom home into a refuge for some 600 cats that later became available for adoption. Take a look.
Well, I've heard a lot about that. I didn't know about cats, that they are demons, shetani, but I would like to tell people that's not the case, because I have so many cats have passed through my hands, so many cats are living here, but I've never encountered any of those things. These are animals, they are sentient just like you and me, and they need care, they feel pain, they feel happiness, they feel sadness, they get depressed just like us. So there is no difference, and they are not sinister or anything. It's very hard for a cat to attack a human being. Sometimes you may even provoke a cat, they will not attack you.
Okay, did I go?
Yes, sir.
Adoption once a week, once a month.
Well, that's quite astonishing, isn't it? Let's take a look at our Roundup Africa with Shamaka Onwafo.
The Somali airspace has regained its Class A classification after more than 30 years, the International Air Transport Association has disclosed. IATA confirmed the reclassification of the Mogadishu Flight Information Region airspace in a statement on Wednesday. According to IATA, Class A airspace is the sky above the base altitude of about 24,500 feet above mean sea level. In it, all flights must be cleared by air traffic control, which is responsible for maintaining the correct separation between aircraft. IATA further said the move will significantly improve safety in the region and enhance efficiency. The collapse of the state in Somalia in 1991 ended the country's control of its airspace. That control had been run from Nairobi in neighboring Kenya from 1992 until June 2018, when the Somali government transferred management of the airspace to Mogadishu. Somalia airspace has been classified as Class G or uncontrolled airspace for decades. About 400 international flights use Somalia airspace a day, and the change to Class A airspace has the potential to increase traffic to as many as 600 flights a day. A court in Kenya has found a Venezuelan diplomat guilty of murdering the Latin American nation's acting ambassador about 10 years ago at her home in an upmarket Nairobi neighborhood. Dwight Sagari, who was the first secretary at the embassy, was found guilty of the July 2012 killing of Olga Fonseca, Judge Rosalind Corey said in her ruling on Wednesday. The court also convicted 3 Kenyan nationals who had been charged alongside Sagari, saying they were involved in a common plan to carry out the murder. Another suspect who fled after the murder is still at large, and the court said his arrest warrant should remain in force. Sagari could be tried for the murder because he did not enjoy diplomatic immunity after Venezuela waived it off following the crime, the court ruled. 57-year-old Fonseca was found strangled in her bedroom less than 2 weeks into her posting to Nairobi, which followed the abrupt departure of the previous ambassador after he was accused by his domestic staff of sexual harassment. Sagari and his co-accused will be sentenced at a later date. A court in Mali has sentenced a man to death over a 2019 attack that killed 3 United Nations peacekeepers. The United Nations peacekeeping mission disclosed this without naming the defendant. Mali has been struggling for a decade with violence from armed non-state actors that have spread across the Sahel region despite costly international efforts to quash it. The United Nations multi-dimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, MINUSMA, has been operational in the country since 2013. The trial centered on an attack on 5 peacekeepers traveling through the rural commune of Sibi in southern Mali, some 50 kilometers from the capital Bamako, on February 22, 2019. 3 were killed, all from Guinea, which is one of the largest contingents in the mission. According to MINUSMA, Bamako's criminal court on Tuesday convicted the man of acts of criminal association, murder, robbery and illegal possession of firearms in connection with the CB attack. Judges imposed the death penalty, which has not been carried out in Mali since a moratorium was passed on executions in 1980. MINUSMA has deployed over 13,000 troops to contain the violence, which is concentrated in Mali's north and center. The mission has recorded 281 deaths of MINUSMA personnel, many killed when convoys hit improvised explosive devices planted by the armed groups. And that's it on Roundup Africa.
And that's a wrap on Africa Update for this week. Join us next week for another time on the program. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.